Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my stream. My name is Astrology. I am a former FBI employee and professional astrologer. And tonight we have a very special treat. We have the chart of someone who is incredibly famous and someone who has been in the news quite a bit lately as she has a new album coming out. So, this is the chart of Beyoncé. Now, one of the things that I can say astrologically is that it is not often that you get someone, and I mean anybody, not necessarily someone in the public eye, but it's not often that you get someone just post their birth certificate where everyone can see it. Well, in the case of Beyonce, she did post her birth certificate a while back in one of her albums, her actual birth certificate with the date and the place and the time on it. So when I started doing the research on this in my database of my professional software, they have a good 30 or 40,000 charts of famous people and famous companies in it. And I happened to notice that this one was incorrect because I got this software before Beyonce put out her birth certificate. So what's interesting is that her birth time in the software was listed as 10 a.m. on September 4th, 1991, but it's not actually that. It's actually 9:47 p.m., which changes the chart dramatically. Oh, hi, Jody. Nice to have you here, as always. But we have a real opportunity here because she did post her birth information online. So I changed it, and now we have the chart that is accurate. One of the things I do want to mention that we haven't really talked about on the stream at all is that when you are looking for charts, if you're interested in a celebrity or someone you know, and you're looking at their chart, there is something called the Rodden rating. And it's from a lady named um, uh, Lois Rodden, and she was the one who came up with the idea of rating the accuracy of birth times. And so the accuracy that you want to look for in a birth chart is what we call a double A, which is someone whose birth time is well established from their birth certificate, or we have other proof of it. One True Cripple, thanks for joining us as always. The Rodden rating of the birth certificate is really important for any kind of research that you're doing because you want to work with birth data that's accurate. So, for example, a double A would be some kind of official document, such as a birth certificate. An A rating would be very solid, but not as solid as a birth certificate, someone who is present. Um, B rating would probably be someone who was not there but heard about it. A C rating is starts to get questionable whether we heard that it where we heard that it's a certain time, but we can't really prove it. And then anything lower than C is a real challenge to work with. The X rating on a chart indicates that there is no known birth time, and you're going to see that one right away because likely it's a noontime birth time, or some astrologers will use sunrise on that day to cast a person's chart. But for me, I typically use noon just to keep it simple. In any case, with Beyonce, we definitely have a correct birth time now. So let's get into it. Now, in tonight's chart, I'm going to do things a little differently as well. I'm going to go through the basics of the chart as usual, but as we get toward the half-hour point, I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to talk more about how astrology over time can influence people, because that's something that we haven't really talked much about yet. It's more of an intermediate concept, so I'm going to start off with a lot of the beginner stuff, but as we get toward the 30-minute mark, 35-minute mark, I'm going to start talking about what we call the transits, which is moving planets that have an impact on someone's natal chart. And in the case of Beyonce, we're really going to talk about her departure from Destiny's Child and her beginning as a solo artist. I'm going to show you some of the timing on that, which I hope you're going to find super interesting. I certainly did. But we're going to do that toward the middle of the hour. So if you are a beginner at astrology and things start to seem a little bit confusing as we get toward the end, My apologies. I'm going to do the best I can to make it understandable for everybody. Okay? As always, thanks for joining us. Let's get started. So we're going to start where we normally do, which is with the rising sign. So because we have a correct birth time, we know that Beyoncé is an Aries rising. The rising sign is that sign that's on the horizon when you're born, and it's that mask that you wear. Beyoncé is fierce, folks. Aries rising suits her perfectly. Aries rising people want to make a splash. They want to make an immediate impact. Aries rising people focus on action. They focus on what they can do to make a splash. That's really what they focus on. Remember that Aries is the first sign of the zodiac, so there is this potential for a strong sense of self, as in I am is the motto of Aries. If you're not aware, all of the signs of the zodiac do have a motto. In the case of Aries, it's the first sign, and so it's I am. So people who have a lot of Aries in the chart generally can be very self-assured, we'll say. Sometimes it can go a little further than that, and it can be arrogance. But when you see someone with an Aries rising chart, this is someone who takes life by the horns, who doesn't want to shy away from things. They want to take action to make things happen. Now, as you know, from here we go on to the ruling planet of the rising sign, which of course we consider the ruling planet of the chart. This one is super interesting because of where it is. So when we have Aries as a sign, the ruling planet is going to be Mars. Mars, the warrior. Okay, that Mars energy deals with things like the physical body, deals with things like action, what motivates us, how we handle stress. Remember that Mars is kind of like our personal SWAT team. I sometimes call him the dumb jock of the zodiac because he's not always smart, good people. Okay, this isn't Mercury. Mars is about getting shit done. He is not about sitting around and waiting. He doesn't want to think about it. He just wants to do it. Okay, which can have its advantages in certain situations. But what makes this particular Mars placement really interesting is it's twofold. The first is that it's Mars in Leo. Okay, Mars in Leo says, I am going to advocate for myself. Leo is the sign, one of the signs of me, me, me. Leo and Aries are both fire signs, and those are the two signs most likely, I would say, to advocate for themselves in a very direct way. Mars in Leo definitely shows that. Mars in Leo wants to get out there and prove that they're better than everybody else, wants to be in front of people, wants to lead. Those are all traits that you will often see from someone with Mars in Leo. And that's interesting on its face, but we also need to look at where it is. Because for someone of her celebrity, it's not in a position you'd expect. So Mars is here in the fourth house. Now, the fourth house is a place where you're going to find themes about parents, themes about home. A lot of times people who have a heavy fourth house are very family oriented. The idea of home is not just an emotional place, it's also a physical place, which means that it represents the actual physical place where you live, whether it's a house, whether it's an apartment or a townhouse or condo or whatever it is. That is your private space. Okay? And when you have planets in the fourth house, there is a tendency to want to do things in that private space. So that Mars and Leo placement is very outgoing and wants to make a splash. But sitting in the fourth house, it really shifts the energy of it. Remember I said that Mars was about motivation. Well, what is Beyoncé motivated to do? Well, she is motivated to keep her life private. And by all accounts, she really does not want people knowing about her private life. She does a very good job, as much as is possible, of keeping her private life and her private matters out of the public eye. And with this placement, you can absolutely see the motivation to have privacy. And this is privacy that is guarded very fiercely because we're talking about Mars. As I said, Mars doesn't mess around. Okay. So we're talking about a planet that is very protective of self privacy. And as I said, you can see that in how she handles her overall life. Her public life is something else, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about her private life, and she guards that jealously. Okay. So as we move back out, let's take a look at some of the basics as we normally do. First thing we're going to look at is the elemental balance. And we can see that really everything looks pretty balanced except for one area, and that is Earth. We only have one singleton, one Earth planet, which means it is a singleton. And singletons always are going to draw a lot of attention, ladies and gentlemen. We know this. We've talked about this before, okay? But I want to make sure you understand that because there is a lack of Earth, there's an Earth singleton. It means that for Beyonce, likely she had a lot of lessons around her work, around money, around things that are tangible, about taking responsibility. Those were lessons that were likely extremely important for her. And I would not be surprised at all if her close friends and her romantic partnerships had more Earth to work with, because typically when you lack an element, not necessarily a complete void like we've seen in other charts, but when you have one, you are looking for more balance with other people who have that element, whether you realize it or not. Okay. Now that singleton, we can see that it's going to be important already. But in a moment, you're going to see why it's even more vital than perhaps we would have thought. Because that Earth singleton is none other than her sun in Virgo. Yeah. The only planet in her chart that is in the Earth element is her sun. So that's already a big deal. So let's talk about the sun in Virgo. And I hope my wife is listening to this, and part of me hopes she's not listening to it. She's heard me dunk on Virgo enough times. Not that I plan to do that completely, but as I've said before, all the signs have their good and bad points. So let's talk about Virgo as a sign. Virgo is a Mercury ruled sign. One of the most incredible parts of Virgo people is that they are extremely discriminating. They know the difference in very small amounts. A Virgo person can tell differences between colors and shapes, and in this case, sounds, what sounds good, what looks good. Your Virgo person is very discriminating. They have a very keen eye, and they notice things that other people don't necessarily notice. So keep that in mind. If you are interested in dating a Virgo, good people, make sure that you show up on that date and you look good. Not flashy, but your shoes are shined, your outfit is pressed, that you take care of all the small things, and you'll do much better with Virgo, because for Virgo, small things are big things. Now, on the not so great side of Virgo, we do have a tendency to be nitpicky and extremely detail oriented, sometimes to a fault. Virgo is a sign that is very discriminating, which can also be characterized as critical. And the idea here is that Virgo people can be very critical, but I want you to know something else. Virgo folks are even more critical of themselves. So if you know a Virgo person and you know that they're critical, just remember, you're probably hearing half of what they actually do to themselves. Okay? So and again, I'm married to one, so I get to see the side of Virgo that is I've seen both sides of Virgo. I've seen the very, very picky side, but the other side of Virgo is the troubleshooter of the zodiac. And if you are strong personally, if you can handle it, if your ego can handle it, then I call Virgo the troubleshooters of the zodiac. And I want to explain what I mean. If you have a plan, an idea, a process, whatever it is, tell your Virgo what it is. Give them all the details and let them poke holes in it because they will show you how to do it more effectively, just plain old better. Okay? But you have to be able to handle the criticism. And a lot of people aren't. A lot of people feel like Virgos are just being critical to be critical. They're not. There is not a malicious bone in a Virgo person's body. Okay? What they are is extremely detail oriented and they are very sensitive to slight shifts. So if you are a big enough person, give your Virgo a plan and let them poke holes in it. My wife is my ultimate confidant, and she is the person that I run everything by. And if she tells me it's good, then I know it's good. And if she gives me feedback, sometimes I want to hear it, folks, and sometimes I don't because I'm human. But no matter whether I want to hear it or not, I take it seriously because I know she's trying to make me better. And I can honestly say I would not be who I am today without her and her feedback. One example I will give you is that when we were dating, I drank a lot of sugared soda, a ton. And one of the things that she said to me early on was, I am really worried about your health. Can you shift to diet? That would at least help. And so, yes, at that time, I shifted to diet. I have been drinking diet ever since. And thankfully, I've managed to avoid a lot of problems just because of that alone. Virgo is also a sign that is really good at anything health related. My wife is a former forensic molecular biologist, and you'll find a lot of Virgo people who are interested in the life sciences as a whole. But because they are Mercury related, they are also really good writers and speakers as well. But Virgo has a lot to offer if you are strong enough to handle it. I'll just put it that way. I think that's the best way I can say it. In any case, in this case, we have, as I said, the one Virgo singleton. And look where it is. It's in the 5th house of creativity and solo performance. Interesting. There aren't a ton of planets here that talk about group efforts, but there is one big planet, the Sun in Virgo, in the 5th house, which says that she was likely, even though she was with Destiny's Child for quite a while, and that formed a part of her success, she was more suited to be a solo artist. And we will talk more about that in the second half of the hour. But understand that it's not just the fact that this is the only Earth sign that's important about this planet. You're going to notice that here in the middle, we've talked about the aspects, right? We've talked about the connections between the planets. And if I scroll into the middle, you're not going to see a whole lot here. There's a few, but not much. When we have a planet that is not connected to anything else, we call it unaspected. And we've seen some unaspected planets in some of the charts that we've done on this channel before, okay? And here with Virgo, we have no Ptolemaic aspects to this planet. Now, when I say Ptolemaic, I mean one of 5. I mean, it has no conjunctions, no oppositions, no squares, no sextiles, and no trines. In other words, there is no planet within a reasonable range of being right next door, opposite, within a 90-degree angle, a 60-degree angle, or a 120-degree angle. There's nothing, okay? If I were to draw an axis from the sun, take a look. There's nothing there. There's nothing there. That's mainly what we're looking at when we're looking at aspects. Mainly we're looking at the hard aspects, which are the square and the opposition. But there's nothing close enough. This next planet is Mercury in Libra, and it's at 3 Libra. So it's way far away from 12 Virgo. It's not even close to being a conjunction. So we have an unaspected planet here. We have an unaspected sun, which is why I've put the sun unaspected symbol up here on the chart. Okay. This is something that I typically do whenever I do a chart. When I go through it, if I see a planet that's unaspected, that I know that's going to stick out. Virgo is not a sun sign that is typically known for wild acclaim, right? And celebrity. Usually that falls in the Leo range. A lot of fire signs are very comfortable being out there in the public eye. The air signs are more comfortable with it too than others, but Virgo is not it. Virgo is a sign that is typically content to be behind the scenes on things and just hang back and do what they do and do it well. But Virgo is a mutable sign, folks, which means that they're the worker bees of the zodiac. They do an incredible amount of work, but it's behind the scenes. They don't expect a lot of credit for it. Okay? So to have a singleton, a Virgo sun sign, a Virgo singleton sun that's unaspected, that's huge. And sitting in the 5th house of public performance, solo performance, yeah, already we're seeing a picture of Beyoncé, and we haven't even really gotten into any of the details. Okay? So we've got that very strong sun sitting in the 5th house, and not only is it a singleton, but it's also unaspected. Okay. So where do we go from here? Well, as you likely have noticed, there's this really big set of Libra planets sitting in the 6th house. Obviously, we can't avoid talking about that. So let's do that. So right now I have 5, we've got 5 planets in Beyonce's natal chart. We've got Mercury, Saturn, Jupiter, Venus, and Pluto. Now, I could almost make a couple of groupings here because Venus and Pluto are close enough that they're considered conjunct. We definitely have a conjunction between Saturn and Jupiter. And then we have we have a conjunction between Mercury and Saturn, but we don't have one between Mercury and Jupiter. So they're all chained together, but there's no true stellium here. We don't have 3 planets within 7 degrees of each other. But we do have what's called a sign stellium. We have 5 Libra planets. So that's what we call a sign stellium. Now, what makes this particular sign stellium so interesting is that we can see how Venus is the one that is basically calling the shots for this whole chart. Now, we did say that we have Mars, right, as the ruling planet. And certainly we're going to give Mars his due, no question. But watch as we drill down. You've seen this movie before, folks, but I think it's important that you see it again so that you understand how important it is. And what you're going to find interesting is that even though what I'm about to talk about is something that doesn't often happen in charts, in people who are famous, it tends to happen a little bit more because it's so powerful. Okay. So I've done in the past what's called a dispositor chart. Basically, this is a way that we see what planets are providing the energy for a chart so we can determine which planets are really the ones that are calling the shots. Okay? So we have a very powerful Venus in Libra. Venus in Libra is one of the most creative placements that you can ask for. Venus rules Libra, so this is a planet that is in rulership. It's in a sign that it loves. I know a Venus in Libra person who used to be called the Pie Queen of Tokyo. She would actually make American desserts, and she lived in Tokyo, Japan, and her nickname was the Pie Queen of Tokyo. Venus is about sugar and sweetness. Okay, so when you have Venus in Libra, it is very likely that you like to cook or bake or both. I actually have a professional chef with a similar setup. And the woman I was describing earlier, the Pie Queen of Tokyo, also has a similar setup to Beyoncé. She has, I think, 5 Libra planets. Okay, but what makes this sign stellium so important is that it has at its base Venus in Libra, which is very strong. So we already know that because Mercury's in Libra, Saturn's in Libra, Jupiter's in Libra, and Pluto's in Libra, all of those planets are calling back to that Venus for support because Venus rules the sign of Libra. So we already have half of the planets in this chart that are calling back to Libra, that use Libra as support. So let's look at the others. Let's go back to this Mars, which is the ruling planet of the chart. So it does have some power, right? Take a look at this. We have Mars in Leo, right? Leo is ruled by the sun. The sun is in Virgo. The sun in Virgo is ruled by Mercury. Mercury is ruled by Venus. So the sun also calls back to Venus. So that's 6 out of 10. Let's look at our 2 planets in Scorpio. Since I do a bunch of Scorpio work on this channel, I'm sure plenty of you know what the ruling planet of Scorpio is. But as a reminder, it is Pluto. So we're going to take these 2. It's going to go back to Pluto. And look at what sign Pluto is in, folks. Libra. So Pluto in Libra goes back to Venus. And it stops there because Venus is in the sign that it rules. So far we've got 1, 2, 7, 8, 9. We got 1 planet left. We have Neptune that is in Sagittarius. Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter's in Libra, so that means it also goes back to Venus. So once again, folks, we have a chart here that has a very unique and powerful configuration, and we call that a final dispositor. So on a day-to-day level, what does that mean? It means that for someone like Beyoncé, when her Venus is hit with a transit, when she's having a transit to that Venus, it's going to affect the entire chart. With most people, that does not happen. I need to stress how rare this is. But again, with a big star like Beyoncé, to have Venus in Libra as a final dispositor of the chart is absolutely perfect. And it is very, very helpful for the things that she does for a living. As you know, Venus is a creativity planet. Venus is a planet that rules anything that you can do in the arts, together with with Neptune. And in this case, one of the few connections that the chart actually has is a connection between Venus and Neptune. She has a 60-degree angle between those 2 planets. So Neptune is even supporting these efforts, folks. Okay? So this is a chart that is very well set up for any kind of creative activity. If she doesn't cook or bake in her personal life, I would be stunned. But I don't have the evidence to support or refute that at the moment. Okay? So we have someone who is a maverick. We have someone who has an unaspected sun in Virgo. We have a chart that is completely and totally Venus focused. And so now we need to look at a couple other things. And we're going to talk about what was going on in a particular time of Beyonce's life as well, to talk about the timing. So one more thing before we hit the timing. Let me show you this. Now, all of the planets move at different speeds, and you've heard me refer to Jupiter cycles and Saturn cycles and Uranus cycles. Okay, they all have a different speed. So it takes all of them a different amount of time to go around the zodiac. For example, with the moon, it takes 28.333 days. Okay, with Pluto, it can take 13 to 19 years to get through one sign. So it can take about 250 years to get all the way around the zodiac. Big difference. Beyonce was born at a very interesting time because she has a Jupiter Saturn conjunction. Now, for those of you who are Dark Crystal fans, if you watch the stream, you know I'm a huge Dark Crystal fan. When Saturn and Jupiter are conjunct, it happens once every 20 years. Jupiter has a 20-year cycle, Jupiter has a 12-year cycle, and Saturn has a 29-year cycle. And so when they come together, it's every 20 years about. We call that the Great Conjunction. So Beyonce was born at a time of a great conjunction, which is a very propitious event indeed. This is a very lucky thing for her. It gives her a lot of power and a lot of potential to do good things, because her ability to expand and her ability to create boundaries are in the same sign. They're working together. You and I have talked before about how how Saturn and Jupiter are polar opposites. Jupiter is the good time Charlie who wants you to get out there and learn and eat and drink and do, right? And Saturn is the taskmaster of the zodiac. He's the one who says, focus, be responsible, set good boundaries, right? Long-term goals. That's his job. The two of them are polar opposites, but when they are in the same sign together, they can be a powerful combination, especially in Libra, because Saturn in Libra is what we call exalted. In other words, boundaries are probably not a big problem for Beyonce. Okay? She probably has a really good handle on her boundaries, which definitely helps with the whole, I want to keep my life private thing. That's probably not that hard for her, simply because it's important to her to keep healthy boundaries. And with Libra, it's balanced boundaries, folks. Okay? So we have someone who likely does boundaries very well and who considers other people as she expands and grows. Okay? That's a great spot. That's a great placement for her to have, is that great conjunction. Okay. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to move into the part where we talk about transits for Beyonce. Now, for those of you who are fairly new to astrology, transits are moving planets that have an impact on the person's chart. Okay? So I'm going to pull the first chart up. This is a chart of Beyonce in the middle and a particular moment in her life. Let me show it to you. Okay, so this chart is what we call a biwheel. There are two wheels on it. That middle chart that you're looking at is the same one that we just had up. It's just a little smaller because it's in the middle. What I have done is I have pulled a chart for a very interesting time in her life. In this case, it was August 16th of 2003. Now, why would I pick that? Because I want to talk to you tonight about the Saturn cycle. Okay, Saturn has a 29-year cycle, folks, which means that Saturn goes all around the zodiac in about 29 years. Many of you know already what I'm going to mention next, which is called the Saturn return. When Saturn returns to the place where it was when you were born, it's important because Saturn is the planet of growing up. You can almost think of it like a final exam in school. Okay? Saturn's job is to make us grow up. For a long time, for example, the average age of FBI agents was 29. Around 28, 29, 30, you're going to see people grow up. Okay? They become an adult in astrological eyes because that's Saturn's job. In the first 29 years of your life, your job is to go from having the authority of your parents to the authority of teachers, the authority of bosses and other people in your life, and you become the authority over your own life. So in my case, for example, I joined the government right around my Saturn return, and I actually had my polygraph on my 29th birthday. I mean, I literally did. No, I didn't plan it that way. At the time, I was not as well versed in astrology, so I wasn't looking at charts. But the fact that it happened like that is very, it's a little bit scary, but it's also very cool. Saturn, as it makes its way through your first 29 years of life, is transiting, it's moving. And as it moves, it's going to make connections to all the planets in your chart. So what does that mean for us? Well, I want you to take a look at this 2003 chart. What I did was I pulled a chart for the moment when Beyonce's Saturn transit, which is over here, transiting Saturn, was making an exact 90-degree angle to her natal Saturn. Now, why is this important? Well, because it says we are exactly 3/4 of the way through the Saturn cycle. And when Saturn makes a connection to to your natal Saturn position, folks, this is like 7.5 to 8. This is 15 or 16. This is 21 to 22. Okay. And this is where Beyonce was, this 21 to 22 period. When Saturn makes a 90-degree angle to your natal Saturn, it's a push. It's, hey, it's time for you to grow up. It's time for your boundaries. It's time for you to make adult decisions. Okay? I just went through this at 51 years old. Okay? Not too long ago. I went through the same thing. I got cancer right around that time and had to work through that. I had a lot of employment challenges around that time, a lot of struggles with my employment, which was with the government at that time. Saturn actually rules the government too, which is kind of interesting. And Saturn making a connection to your natal Saturn is a big deal because it forces you to make decisions that are going to be healthy for you, but to do so in a way that is responsible. So this was August 16th, 2003. Now, why that's significant is because you had Beyonce about 2 months before this. She released her first solo album. Now, if you go online and look it up, you're going to see that Destiny's Child was not officially disbanded yet. They were on a hiatus so that all of them could pursue their individual projects. But right after the release of her first album, which of course was a huge hit, she had a Saturn square Saturn. Now, one of the things you also have to understand is that planets, except for the sun and moon, but all the other planets move direct, which means forward in the zodiac, and retrograde, which means backward in the zodiac. So that Saturn was moving forward at the time, moving this way. Okay. But the thing is that Saturn is retrograde 41% of the time. So it's not going to be in direct motion all the time. So what do you think happened? Well, not too long after that, Saturn, after moving forward, went retrograde. But when he went retrograde, he made another connection to the natal Saturn. Now, I'm going to show you that chart next. But before I do that, I want to show you one other thing. Right here is the part of fortune. Now, I am not going to go into the geeky math of how we got the part of fortune. I've had to calculate it by hand, and it's kind of a pain in the ass. But the part of fortune is a place for earthly blessings. This is the transiting part of fortune, and it is opposite Jupiter and Venus. Jupiter, the planet of expansion. Venus, which is not only a creativity planet, but it's also a money planet. So at the time of this return, at the time of this square, she was having that connection to her to the transiting part of fortune. So that's money right there. Okay. And of course, because it's connected to Venus, that's not just the money, it's also the creativity. It's earthly blessings in whatever form they are. Okay. Then the other thing we're going to look at briefly is we're going to look at Neptune. Remember that Neptune is a planet of inspiration. Neptune is a planet of deep creativity. Neptune is the planet of music. And what was it doing? It was making a 120-degree angle to a number of the planets in that Libra sign stellium at the time. So it was helping juice all of that up. Not really a surprise, but that's how it is. Okay? So this is the first of the charts I'm going to show you tonight. This is what we call the closing Saturn square. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. When you're 7 or 8, you have Saturn making a square to your natal Saturn. That's the opening Saturn square. At 15 or 16, you have your transiting Saturn opposing your natal Saturn. That's the Saturn opposition. And then at 21 or 22, which is where we are tonight, this is what we call the closing Saturn square. So all of the charts I'm pulling tonight are for Beyoncé's natal Saturn square. So they're all going to look alike, but the important thing is this is when she broke away from Destiny's Child. This is the time when she started to go solo. Okay? All right, let's look at the second time that during this closing Saturn square that Saturn makes a connection to her natal Saturn. Take a look. Now we're talking about January 8th of 2004. So like 4 or 5 months later. This time, you're going to notice that transiting Saturn is retrograde. So it's actually going this way now. But whether it's moving in direct motion or retrograde motion, it still is making a connection to the natal chart. I can't stress that enough. And obviously, the events that we're talking about didn't just happen on the days that I'm mentioning. It is a continuum. When you're having a transit from a planet like Saturn or Jupiter or any of the slower planets, any of the social planets or the generational planets, these transits tend to last a long time. So as we look at this, keep that in mind. All of them are going to be important, and it's stuff that is absolutely going to happen over time. It is not something that you're going to see just on a given day. Okay? Okay, so as we look at the second uh, closing square, if you will, right? This time in retrograde motion. What are we going to see? Well, we're going to see that Beyonce's natal Neptune and transiting Pluto are conjunct. They're right next to each other. Pluto is powering that natal Neptune. Okay? It is. It's giving more creativity. It's giving more inspiration. Okay? But it also is making a sextile, which is a 60-degree angle to that Venus and to her natal Pluto. Remember earlier I was saying that if a planet is making a connection to Beyonce's Venus, it's gonna be a big deal. This is a big deal because remember that Venus forms the underpinning of this whole chart. Okay, I can't stress that enough. Like that Venus is killer in this chart. It's amazing, but there's a stronger impact when you have a transit to Venus. In this case, we have powerful Pluto making a sextile, a 60-degree angle to Venus. The sextile is an opportunity aspect. In other words, it brings out opportunities in the realm of both Pluto and Venus. On the Venus side, it brings out money, it brings out creativity. On the Pluto side, it brings out power and control. During this time, she's taking more personal control over her career. It's not her and two other people right now. It's not her and Destiny's Child. It's Beyonce alone. Because remember, they took a break. They're on a hiatus. But because we have that closing Saturn square getting a second hit, remember, this is the second hit on it, we see that energy is going to continue. All right, so that's the second hit. Now we're going to look at the third one. So I have one more chart for you to see. This one is the final closing Saturn square. Okay? And I want to say that after this square, Saturn is going to move forward, but it's not going to retrograde back far enough to make a connection to her natal Saturn again. Okay? So Saturn's going to keep moving, and eventually it will make connections to her other planets as well. But for us, we want to focus on the fact that this is a continuous thing. So it started in August of 2003. January 2004 was the second hit. Here's the third hit. May 3rd, 2004. So for the last 9 to 12 months of Beyonce's life, she's been having this Saturn transit. Let's take a look at this chart. So once again, we have transiting Saturn and natal Saturn. And this time, of course, we don't have a retrograde because we have Saturn in direct motion, right? Take a look at what else is happening. At that moment, we also have Jupiter making connection to her natal sun, which is outstanding for any kind of growth or expansion. That's just an added extra. Okay, that's not something we would normally expect always at the same time that we're having a closing Saturn square, folks. But in this case, it's an added bonus. So this particular transit was important as well, and it pushed her even further forward. What else do we have? Well, we still have this Pluto-Neptune connection. Remember I said that if the planets are slow movers, the connections can last for a while? Well, that Pluto-Neptune connection, folks, can probably last 3 or 4 years. Easy. Okay? And so keep that in mind too. It's the same thing. They just haven't moved much. To be fair, it's only been 4 months, and honestly, Pluto and Neptune don't move very far in 4 months. So you would expect that. But it means that influence, that power, that increased inspiration, the musical power, if you will, is just going to continue to be on the front burner here. Now, what else do we have? Well, we've got transiting Neptune, which is making a 120-degree angle to both her Jupiter and her Venus, right? It's at 15 Aquarius at this point. And so it is having a really positive connection. When you see planets that are trine, they get along generally because they're in the same element. You've got Libra that's an air sign, you've got Aquarius that's an air sign. Now that doesn't mean that all trines are positive, folks. A lot of trines in a chart can make somebody lazy because trines are helpful and signs get along, but they're not motivating. There's no friction. Friction is really what drives the action, astrologically speaking. So when we're looking for friction, folks, we often look for squares, oppositions, and conjunctions. Those are typically what we call the hard aspects, okay? Ones that force us forward. Now, the trine doesn't do that, but the trine is just a nice added bonus to help her along, and especially it being the planet of music and what she does for a living. And once again, it's making a connection to, hello, that really strong Venus, that really powerful final dispositor. Again, remember, anything that affects that Venus is going to juice up the whole chart. Okay. Then, as a final look, we can also see that we have Uranus over here. Okay. Now, I've talked about Uranus often in this stream, and I call Uranus the planet that breaks shit, okay? But I also want to mention that he's the innovator. He's the one who says, hey, this isn't working, try something else. Uranus is one of the slow-moving planets, right? Uranus has an 84-year cycle, so it spends about 7 years in a sign. So it has begun making a very slow opposition to Beyoncé's sun. And when you have Uranus opposing your sun, it means it's time to shake things up. It's time to do things that are different. It's time to re-energize things that are stagnant. Now, again, this is from May 3rd, 2004. This is the closing Saturn square. So all of the things, all of the transits that we've seen tonight from the closing Saturn square are really important for you to understand, because that's in astrology how we do the timing. I have many clients who are 24, 25, 26, and let me tell you, folks, you start to feel the pressure at that time. Sometimes it can seem like parental pressure, because remember, our parents are our original authority. When we're born, they're our authority. Our job, as far as Saturn is concerned, is to move into us being the independent authority of our own lives. So as we go through the opening Saturn square at 7.5-ish, the Saturn opposition at 15 or 16, the closing Saturn square, okay, at 21, 22, like Beyoncé went through at that time, all of those times are going to push us forward. Ideally, they're going to motivate us to become more independent, to become adults, to grow up. I do call Saturn the planet of adulting for a reason. And so if you are in that range, 24, 25, 26, folks, you are going to feel some pressure. It's Saturn. It's going to be okay, but to ease the pressure, you have to do the work of Saturn, which means you have to grow into being an adult, which is why a lot of times people will get a new job during this time, right around their Saturn return, like I did. They will get married. In some cases, they will get divorced. I have one client who was getting divorced at her Saturn return. She was making the responsible decision because her partner just wasn't working for her. So she got divorced. We have people who have their first child when you could afford a house. Buying a house was a thing that often happened around the Saturn return. And so you're going to find that people are making very adult decisions. I was lucky enough to talk to my oncologist and ask him for his chart because I have very few doctors' charts in my practice. And he gave me his chart. And wouldn't you know it, he graduated from medical school and began as an oncologist right around 29. You shouldn't be surprised to hear it by now, folks, but that 29 year is a big deal. That 29 year point is a big deal. The other piece of the puzzle that I want to mention is that if you've heard the term over the hill, folks, over the hill is not 40. Over the hill is 30. It's a Saturn saying. You go over the hill at 30. You're going to do all this again in the next 29 to 30 years, folks. Just like I'm about to do. I'm about to go over the hill again at 58, 59. That's the Saturn return we're talking about. If you're lucky, you'll get a third Saturn return at 88, 89, 90. At each of these points, it requires you to look at your life and say, for what and for whom am I responsible? What changes do I need to make? Which ones are going to benefit me moving forward? And as I get older, because Saturn's the planet of growing older, what are the things that I have to consider? Okay. So I hope that tonight's stream has given you a little bit of an idea of how we perform analysis as astrologers, but also hopefully it gave you some insight into the Saturn cycle. Beyonce's closing Saturn square was a big, big deal for her. Right around that time is when she went solo. For the record, Destiny's Child was on a hiatus for a while, but they actually did not officially break up until 2006. And all of the things that we saw during her closing Saturn square all set up that next phase of her life where she went solo. Okay. Now, I'd like to take a moment to answer any questions that anybody has, because we're almost out of time. So I'll open the floor to questions. Okay, well, hearing none, I would like to thank you as always for joining the stream. This one was just an amazing chart for so many reasons. I hope it's given you more insight into how Saturn plays a role in our lives. And if you work with an astrologer, Saturn is a planet that your astrologer will definitely be tracking for you. I know for me as a Capricorn moon and rising person, Saturn is the ruling planet of my chart. So Saturn and I have had a lot of discussions. But the thing you have to understand about Saturn is that Saturn rules the knees and joints and the lower back and the skin in the physical body. And he rules the knees because, as it said, eventually all of us are going to bow to Saturn. Remember, he is Father Time, so he's never lost. But we'll all have to bow to him eventually. So it's really important that you know where you are in your Saturn cycle so that you can work with him well. In any case, thanks as always, folks. I look forward to seeing you again next week. And as always, if you have suggestions of people you would like to see, or if you would like to volunteer your chart and have me do it online for everyone to see, that's a brave choice. But if you'd like me to do it, I'm happy to do that, and I'm open to that idea. Thanks as always, folks. Have a great week. See you next time.